Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. GS1 is a nonprofit organization you interact with every day, but probably do not know by name. Its product, the Universal Product Code, or UPC barcode, is on virtually everything you buy. The original UPC barcode transformed shopping in the 1970s, first providing retail workers the ability to scan products into the inventory management and point of sale systems, and then later allowing self-checkout by shoppers. GS1's internal mantra is, the identification of everything makes anything possible, and its new GS1 Digital Link Standard uses QR codes to connect and track products, even specific individual units of products produced across the entire lifecycle. We wanted to explore some of the possibilities for making the supply chain more sustainable and efficient, as well as enabling easier access to more information about products by shoppers. Our guest today is Vivian Tai, Director of Innovation at GS1 US, the American division of GS1, whom I recently met and talked with. That conversation was full of surprises, especially if you like to geek out on the potential for tracking, for example, a plastic beverage bottle from production to the retail point of sale and even after it's been collected for recycling. The evolution of circular products will be driven by scannable codes, something that every one of us has a tool to do in our own pockets. The combination of a smartphone and QR code could unlock closed-loop recycling that ensures companies who make or distribute products and packaging take responsibility for the materials they use at every step, ultimately reducing the need for extraction of raw materials to lower humanity's environmental footprint. You can learn more about GS1 US and its technologies at www.gs1us.org. That's GS1, the number one.org. Welcome to the show, Vivian. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm glad you came and talked with us today. I wanted to start off by asking about the fact, after 50 years in business, GS1's celebrating its anniversary. How did this organization that really touches all of our lives get started?
Well, so GS1 traces its origin to a really historic decision in the United States on April 3rd, 1973, by an ad hoc committee of the Uniform Grocery Code Council, which is UGCC, a corporation that was previously formed by the grocery industry's leading trade organization, to pick a linear barcode as the universal product code symbology. So in September of 1974, the UGCC became the Uniform Product Code Council and the administrator of the barcode. That was a mouthful.
It sure is, but it's a nonprofit and it's global. It's not just the United States.
Yes. Yeah, and the barcode has really grown in versatility, and it's really amazing because it's scanned more than 10 billion times a day, and yet people don't ever really think about this. I have a fun fact that I want to share, which is that the first ever UPC marked item scanned was actually a 10-pack 50 sticks of Wrigley's Juicy Fruit chewing gum, and the gum was scanned at a Marsh supermarket in Troy, Ohio. So that is a fun fact because you can definitely use that as trivia, and likely nobody will ever get that right,
unless of course I assume there's a statue at the scam.
Yeah, unless of course if they work at GS1 or something like that.
What can the UPC do? I mean, in a nutshell, and I know there's 50 years of history in that question, but how does this help us track supply chains rather than just, charge somebody the right amount for a product?
Yeah, so actually, the UPC is a generic identifier that lets scanners, or it's in a machine readable format, recognize a product. So it is something that it goes way beyond just beep at checkout at the point of sale, right? When we think about how it is tracking the movement of products, assets, locations, shipping containers throughout the supply chain, it's really because there's a need for a common language
Mhm.
throughout the supply chain with different trading partners to refer to all these things as products move throughout the supply chain.
We tend to think of this as something that we get scanned once when we're buying it, but in fact, that product may be scanned many times as it travels through the
Yes,
economy.
yes, exactly.
So, how has the UPC code evolved over time? It doesn't look like it used to all the time. Uh, there's there are a lot of changes. So, what's the technology path looking like these days?
Yeah, so actually, I would say that it is a non-linear technology path, and that's kind of a pun. So
Mhm.
hoping that people will get that. But so it, I would say that the UPC barcode, the 1D barcode, is just one format of a data capture mechanism. There are
Mhm.
so many others out there, right? So there's like RFID, there's NFC, there's QR codes, there are data matrix, there's even computer vision in a way can be considered a data capturing mechanism, right? So
Mhm.
it's really limited by our imagination what can capture information and what can hold and recognize a GS1 identifier, really.
So, do you try to work with all of those different forms of identification and harmonize them and aggregate all that information? What's GS1's role in that kind of evolving and diversifying environment for identification?
Yeah, so I work on the innovation side of GS1 US, and really our role is to extend the reach and relevance of GS1 standards to the many emerging technologies out there. And we already have a strong presence with technologies like RFID, like 2D. And actually, one of the most exciting developments in our standards that we could speak to today is actually the 2D barcode, the QR code, and
Mhm.
our standard digital link.
Now, the QR code emerged back in the 90s. Was that coming out of GS1 or was it developed by others and you've adopted it?
Oh, so the development and use of QR codes that wasn't GS1,
Mhm.
but it was I think it was a perfect um, a perfect circumstance that really made it so that um, we now have the convenience of being able to have readers in our pockets.
Mhm.
So actually, the QR codes started, I believe, in the automotive industry back in the 90s, and they were primarily used in a way that was just helpful amongst, the automotive supply chain.
Yeah.
But as we in Asia, they really were able to adopt it for a lot of uses. Getting access to web uh,
Well, how
digital
is a QR code
experiences.
different? How is a QR code different than the 1D, the linear barcode that we traditionally think of as a UPC?
Yeah, so I would say that the biggest difference between a 1D barcode and a 2D barcode is really in that data storage capacity.
Mhm.
So because a 2D barcode, a QR code can carry up to around 7,000 characters instead of, somewhere in the territory of, a 1D barcode can do somewhere in the territory of like 20 to maybe 100 or so.
Mhm.
So you can see that difference can actually mean that a 2D barcode could contain a URL, for example, which
Mhm.
is really exciting because that's where the web-enabled experiences come in.
There's a lot to dig into in that. I want to talk about the web capabilities in a little bit, but you mentioned something that's really important. We have a scanner in our pocket, which changes the ability for the consumer to participate in all this tracking. And it's potentially viable now to think about tracking the full life cycle, including somebody having put it back into the recycling system. Is that kind of end to end full life cycle tracking dependent on the consumer participating? Is there a way for us to incent them to scan a thing when they put it back in the recycling system?
Yeah, so that is actually a pretty multi-layered question. So
Yes, please.
just to answer it in like parts. So yes, there are ways to incentivize consumers to participate in this. And in fact, we see it happening in Europe quite a bit for deposit return schemes. And I mean, you see deposit return schemes all over, but I think that we really have in the US have a lot to learn from our European counterparts, because people are not necessarily just doing it out of oh, I'm going to collect a few cents out
Mhm.
of this plastic bottle that I'm returning. Sometimes it's about having a loyalty program
Mhm.
associated with it, or points associated with it, and being able to scan a QR code, or actually even a 1D barcode, can be a really good conduit for this good behavior. Now, if you're wondering, like, if there are I guess what the difference between what you can do with a 1D versus 2D in this scenario,
Mhm.
it's actually really about that richness of engagement with a 2D barcode, because as I mentioned, it essentially having a 2D barcode and using digital link creates this wealth of experience and consumer engagement opportunities from just that small footprint on the product's packaging. So you're able to direct consumers to a highly tailored experience if you were a brand that wants to do better. So that's one way that consumers can get involved, whether that's through deposit return schemes,
Mhm.
or whether that's through different web experiences, loyalty programs, and such. And the other side of things that isn't consumer dependent is actually, so one of the projects that I'm working on is on material traceability in the global south, and we're just starting in the global south so that we can create a recipe for success, hopefully to take back to the North America and US specifically. But really, we're trying to learn how the use of QR codes could facilitate the gap that we're seeing in the downstream for recyclable materials. So there, it might not be that we will have that perfect one-to-one handoff where we know exactly a certain branded can or a certain branded plastic bottle will end up back in the brand's supply chain or material stream, but we can at least help them take accountability for the mass or the tonnage of materials that they produce out in the world by having QR codes in the latter part of the post-consumer part of the supply chain.
So that's interesting. It's a little like what we talk about as just-in-time manufacturing, where the manufacturing facility is getting the materials it needs just as they are producing, rather than having a lot of inventory on hand. So what we can do is now characterize the flow of materials through the economy, including we've put this much into a market, let's say PET bottles, and we expect this much to be recycled, so that there's a way to think about the closed loop that we haven't had before. Now, I know that you've been working with Delterra, which is a nonprofit working to develop recycling programs, particularly in emerging economies, to help people develop reliable incomes from picking stuff up. How are you working with Delterra to use the QR code to enable that tracking and payment of those incentives?
Yeah, so I was actually alluding to this just a
Mhm.
little earlier, but the material traceability project that I was talking about is actually with Delterra, and it is part of their Rethinking Recycling initiative, which is the kind of their flagship, the thing that they're staking in
Mhm.
the ground. And they're actually experiencing great success in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, and they have some pretty lofty goals of reaching 50% um, materials recovered and materials traced by the end of this year. So
Mhm.
I'm really excited to see how far they come along.
So, in the case of the Delterra program, because they're working with very low income people, are those folks required to have a smartphone in order to participate, or do they scan it when they drop it off at a Delterra location?
Yeah, so actually, a lot of this, the folks participating in the informal economy, they do have a smartphone to scan these things, but it's actually at the facilities where this matters the most. So regardless of whether or not the informal waste pickers have that ability, we kind of close the gap by doing that at the facilities, whether that's at a aggregator, a collector, a sorter, or what have you amongst the supply chain there.
I mean, that could be an incredible benefit for not just the economy, but for the environment down there. Because I know that in the aluminum industry, the same groups, the trash pickers that we're talking about, are actually achieving almost 99% recovery rates in Brazil. It's interesting to think that they would also be able to interrogate an item when they pick it up using their phone to say, how much is this worth? So that they can begin to really focus on the most valuable materials and make a good income.
Yes, I think that at this point, the struggle is with the different grades of plastics, right? There are definitely some that are higher in value and ability to be recycled, like the HDPEs and the PETs of the world. But for part of this project, we're really trying to think through how lower valued plastics can also be a part of this reclamation, really.
There's a lot of opportunity in what we're talking about. I want to take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back. Now let's return to the conversation with Vivian Tai. She's Director of Innovation at GS1 US. That's the organization behind the Universal Product Code found on products and packaging around the world. And we were talking around the world a moment ago. Now, you've introduced Digital Link, which is the next generation of those internet-enabled codes that we're talking about, QR codes. How does that change what you could also present to a consumer? Let's say I pick up a product on the shelf and scan it. Can I learn a lot more about the product now?
Yeah, absolutely. I really think that your limitation here is your imagination, because once you have that URI on the product package, then you're able to, as a brand or producer or manufacturer, create all these experiences associated with that unique product. So maybe if you are a brand and you create like a seasonal can, let's call that, I don't know, brand ABC. You create a seasonal can that has a specific campaign around a certain cause. You can have a wealth of information just for that cause and just for that unique product code. Think of our GS1 identifiers as a way to create digital product passports, if you will, because having a unique identity is to have unique value. So when you are able to do that, you're able to have an association, a wealth of information associated with that unique product.
And your point about the unique product, specific unit of production, not just a description of all the things that are like the similar. I mean, so you could say you could track one can potentially, not necessarily want to, but you could. That
You
means
could
that I
if
might
it's
be able to say,
serialized, yeah.
right. Well, so I could potentially say, where did this can come from, and understand how far it was shipped and so forth. What kind of advice does GS1 give to companies about what to communicate, or do you just let them figure that out for themselves?
Yeah, so I think actually what to communicate is a bit of that secret sauce, that that differentiator that brands really want to set themselves apart on, right? So we at GS1 US are not in the business of messing with the secret sauce. We're really just helping companies on pre-competitive opportunities. So we can tell you and maybe try to inspire the use of the QR code or the digital link in some way, shape, or form, but we will we don't want to guide anyone's hand towards any particular thing.
So you're the phone company rather than the marketing organization that helps them.
Yes, exactly.
So you also told me that sustainability is a relatively recent initiative at GS1. Did it arise out of brands asking for help tracking their environmental impact, or was this something that they recognized as a benefit and added to their use of the UPC code?
Yeah, I really love this question because actually, when I first started with the organization 4 years ago, we didn't really have much involvement at all in sustainability, and
Mhm.
so part of that is because there was limited awareness from the community around how GS1 standards can actually support sustainability use cases. So these past 4 years have been an effort to really establish and create use cases and case studies around how GS1 standards are relevant in this space. So I really feel that us being able to have this conversation today is a great marker of we've been able to make a bit of a progress in this space.
So when you talk with a company about the potential to introduce the use of the UPC code in their sustainability practices, not just the tracking and the materials, but the communicating with the consumer and so forth, how do you characterize those benefits to the company? What's the sales pitch for add sustainability using GS1's UPC code?
Yeah, so actually, I always like to go back to, all right, so you're already investing in the use of GS1 standards, whether that's, at point of sale or maybe that's earlier in your supply chains. So why not try to get more juice out of your squeeze, right? Like try to get more out of your investment in the standards by doing all these things that could potentially help you um, be complying to regulations around sustainability that could help you get further customer engagement and perhaps even greater customer loyalty. It could potentially set your brand apart to have greater, like a higher perception
Mhm.
around your commitments to sustainability, because doing this requires you to commit to transparency, commit to that accountability piece. So it's not really for the faint of heart, but we do, I think, at least in the world that I occupy, which is innovation, like we do try to make change and going into the sustainability space less scary, because it's something that every brand, I believe, has the capacity to do this, has the capacity to speak to something that they're doing for the benefit of the planet.
Well, this is something that, of course, Earth911 deals with every day. People are concerned that their efforts to recycle don't pay off. And this trackability is a way for us to close the loop in terms of the trust provided by a brand that they're actually taking the next step and recycling this responsibility. But there's a couple of different moments in the life of a product, particularly a packaged product. If I buy a box of something like spaghetti, I might use that almost immediately. But if I buy an iPhone, the packaging might be recycled years before I recycle the phone. How do you see enabling those two different moments when you have a recycling experience, the product and the packaging and the content? Should the package have a different UPC code than the product? And do
Oh
we need
my
to?
gosh, I love this question so much because it's something that I think about every now and then when we work on different pilot opportunities to test out hypotheses. So right now, the contents of the packaging and the packaging itself are they just use one identifier.
Right.
But in a world where we're going to see more circularity, where we're going to see greater adoption of reusable packaging, sometimes we see those aluminum packaging that
Mhm.
can be refilled over and over. So having that separation of unique ID for a packaging versus the ID for the content itself is actually a pretty exciting concept within circularity, because you can perhaps have a one-of-one relationship with your individual containers, and that's
Mhm.
when you can uniquely assign value to these containers.
So in the case of a refill program, you could literally look at this container and say, oh, it's been refilled 19 times.
Yes. It's been
Wow.
sanitized by X company or X facility, and it has been, maybe at a certain point, the container might have a threshold for how many times it can be sanitized, right? So it could tell you, like from a food safety perspective, when it's time to retire or recycle this kind of container. So yes, it is really exciting because, again, having that product passport or the container passport um, really gives you a lot of decision making ability around that container.
That really just opens the door to a whole lot of interesting ideas. I mean, like with a phone, for instance, was this refurbished recently? If I'm buying a used phone, I could validate a lot of things, including the provenance, where the stuff came from that it was made of. That's amazing. Now, a lot of people would point to this and say uh, it's a little like what we talk about when we talk about blockchain. Uh, a transactional record that is available to everybody. But the criticism of blockchain is that it is very energy intensive. Have you explored the environmental impact of your tracking platform? Does it track and reduce waste to such a significant degree that it clearly offsets the emissions associated with the system?
Yeah, so that is another, like, it depends kind of question,
Mhm.
because we don't work with just one platform. Like, so
Right.
what we do is, in a pilot or a proof of concept, we often partner with one or couple solution providers, and they make their own independent assessments on what makes sense for their business.
Mhm.
So in the case of the project with Delterra, the blockchain that's used is Stellar, and they are um, they are a proof of stake.
Yeah, they're proof
Uh,
of stake
they're
coin.
a proof of stake, so it is significantly less energy intensive than a proof of work
Mhm.
protocol. But and I wouldn't be able to share how much the the company actually spends on, like, the energy side of things,
Mhm.
because I don't think I could reveal that type of secret sauce. But I do know that there is a significant delta between proof of work versus proof of stake.
Absolutely. And obviously, confidentiality reigns in this case.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a very interesting idea that we are now starting to stack up technology on top of product in order to make the product more efficient and more sustainable. And it will always need to have greater insight into what the emissions impact of the technology that we layer in involves. And so it's a really remarkable time. And you've just really opened my eyes to some of the circular possibilities for refilling, repairing, and other, even reuse, that this has been passed on to 5 people over the course of its useful life. What do you think when you look at where you are from your innovation seat at GS1? How far are we from some radical change in our relationship with the information about the products and the services we buy?
So I love this question because I would say that we're in a moment of a great leap forward. In the US, we have rallied the industry around an initiative called Sunrise 2027, whereby we would be able to scan a 2D barcode, a QR code at point of sale. Now,
Mhm.
why this is important is because right now, when you look at a product packaging, oftentimes you'll see a bunch of different, like, QR codes, barcodes, like, kind of just interspersed throughout the package, and it kind of gets confusing as to where you scan and what you scan for what purpose.
Mhm.
But if you are able to now suddenly have a 2D carrier scanned at point of sale, that means effectively you could have one QR code to rule them all, because of that high data capacity that I just mentioned, and because now it's multifunctional. It's not just something that you can use your phone to scan for a consumer engagement experience. It's also something that has practical inventory management purposes. So being able to do that and having the industry rally around that, whether that's retailers or producers and brands, get behind this, is a very significant unifying moment.
Uh, That's really interesting to hear. And how would somebody listening to the show right now experience a little bit of that? I mean, besides using a phone to scan the next UPC they see, what can they do to learn more about how GS1 US is transforming that experience of consumer information?
Yeah, so if you're a consumer listening to this and you're curious about how your experience might be more streamlined at a grocery store, uh, by 2027, you're going to be able to look up the information, perhaps its nutritional value, perhaps its environmental impact on the product packaging using just one QR code, and you're going to be able to use that same QR code to check out. So perhaps that could mean that you can just check out using your phone, maybe. Perhaps that could mean that you could, if you wanted to, take that to the scanner within the store to take your item home.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's even more exciting is what brands choose to do, how they can get creative here to engage consumers. There's probably a wealth of marketing opportunities here that we're not even scratching the surface of.
Vivian, this has been a fascinating conversation. I want to thank you for spending time with us today. How can folks follow along with what GS1 is doing?
Yeah, so we, of course, have our website, gs1us.org, and we have our own podcast, Next Level Supply Chain. So if you ever want to hear a little bit more about the GS1 US world, we have a bunch of fascinating topics ranging from emerging technologies like computer vision and robotics to more sustainability conversations.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for spending time, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much again for the great conversation, Mitch.
We've been speaking with Vivian Tai. She's the Director of Innovation at GS1, which is the developer of the UPC code that you see on packaging and products all over the world. There's going to be a link in the article that accompanies this episode, so you can find GS1's Next Level Supply Chain podcast, and you can learn more about the organization at GS1, that's the numeral 1, GS1US.org. You know, one of the keystones of disruption of existing markets is the ability to bring new players into an existing business process. The circular economy has struggled to come to life because there are few opportunities to involve the consumer or business customer who, at the end of the useful life of a product or its packaging, must put that material back into the system for reuse. In other words, they're the key step in the circular system. GS1's Digital Link QR codes represent an easily accessible connection for providing incentives to reuse, recycle, or otherwise keep materials in circulation. And as we've heard, the UPC will be a source of product information that allows us to make better buying decisions based on the product's sustainability and reusability. So we are going to keep you updated on this evolving story. Hey, I hope you'll take a moment to share this podcast or any of the more than 420 interviews that we've done on sustainability in your ear with your friends, your family, your coworkers. Please tell your boss. They should be thinking about how to differentiate your business with the technology we're talking about today. So please take a moment to write a review on your favorite podcast platform to help your neighbors find us. You folks are the amplifiers that help us spread more ideas to produce less waste. Tell your friends, family, everyone that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, and other fine purveyors of podcast goodness. Thanks, folks, for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911, and we will be back soon with another innovator interview. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.